She was just a poor woman living in a crumbling basement, until one moment changed everything. She saved a billionaire's child by accident, but what happened next will shock you. From rejection and sacrifice to a family she never expected. This is not just a story, it's a wake-up call. Stay till the end, the twist will leave you speechless. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss our powerful, life-changing content. This is not just entertainment. Every story on Brave Souls Speak carries a meaningful moral lesson that can touch a heart and change a life. From factory floor to family dinner, a billionaire lady learned to see the man who held her world together. I spent 22 years beneath steel beams and concrete dust. My name was Rayhan. And I was just a number in the payroll system of a massive empire. She owned it. Every machine. Every building. Every heartbeat that punched in and out under her name. Elena Vale. People called her the Queen of Steel. Untouchable. Unshakable. A woman carved from glass and thunder. I first saw her in the reflection of a factory window. She walked past, heels clicking like gunshots, eyes like frozen oceans. She never looked down. Never noticed the men who built her world, one aching back at a time. My shift started at 5 a.m. 12 hours of noise, heat, and pressure. Sometimes, I forgot what silence felt like. But I never forgot my daughter's face. Noura. 6 years old, full of questions. Her mother had passed during childbirth. I was all she had. And she was all I fought for. I would save half of every dollar. Skip meals to afford her books. Carry her tiny frame from daycare in oil-stained arms. She never complained about my smell. Only hugged tighter. One night, I stayed late to finish a shipment. Everyone else had left. Lights flickered. Rain hammered the roof like it was trying to break through. Then I heard a voice. Soft. Sharp. Familiar. You should not be here this late. It was her. Elena. I froze. My hands, still coated in metal dust, clenched by instinct. Just finishing orders, I replied. She looked around. As if trying to see the world through my eyes. But she could not. How long have you worked here? She asked. 22 years, I said. Since before your father passed. Her lips parted slightly. Surprise? Regret? I could not tell. You knew him. I nodded. He used to walk the floor every morning, I said. He shook our hands. He remembered names. She looked away. And that silence said more than words. The next morning, everything changed. A new rule, all department heads must spend 2 hours weekly on the factory floor. People whispered. Some mocked. But I saw her. Wearing safety goggles. Walking between machines. Learning names. I kept my distance. But she watched. And I felt it. One evening, as I was leaving, she stood outside. In the rain. Waiting. I want to understand, she said. Teach me. I laughed. Not out of disrespect. But disbelief. You want me to teach you what a furnace feels like? What a man earns for burning his palms. She did not flinch. I want to learn what built this company. The truth. So I showed her. The bruised fingers. The missed birthdays. The men who aged faster than time. We sat on crates and drank tea from my thermos. She listened like a student. No judgment. No pride. That night, I invited her to meet Noura. I do not know why. Maybe I wanted her to see what my world looked like at home. Or maybe I hoped she would understand why I worked so hard. She came. Wore a simple dress. No bodyguards. No press. Noura ran to her, arms wide. And Elena, the woman of steel, knelt and held her like she had known her forever. At dinner, Noura asked her the one question no one had dared. Do you know how to make roti? Elena laughed. Then paused. And admitted she had never touched flour in her life. Noura giggled and said, You can learn. Like Papa taught me. Something cracked open in her then. A softness. A memory. Later that night, Elena stayed behind. Watched me wash dishes. Watched me hum to lull Noura to sleep. Then she whispered, You carry a kingdom with those hands. She never said it like a compliment. More like a revelation. Days turned into weeks. She visited often. Factory floors in the morning. Family dinners in the evening. But the world outside was not silent. Her board grew restless. Rumors spread. Some said I was seducing her. Others called me a liar. Even some men I had worked with began avoiding my eyes. I tried to keep my head down. To protect Noura. To protect Elena. But truth has a way of breaking through. One morning, I was called into HR. They said my position was being reviewed. I was being transferred to a storage unit on the far side of the property. A demotion. A punishment. For caring too much, maybe. I walked home that day with a silence I could not carry. And that night, I did not let Elena in. She knocked. Called my name. But I sat in the dark, holding Noura's drawing of the three of us. Family. The next day, the headlines exploded. CEO Elena Vale resigns. Names factory worker as new co-owner. The world went wild. But none of them knew what I knew. She came to my door with the papers. Eyes trembling, hands steady. I never learned to make roti, she said. But I learned how to see. Then she placed the documents in my hands. You built this empire with your sweat. It is time the world saw you the way I do. My knees gave out. But she held me. And in that moment I realized. She was not stepping down. She was stepping beside me. And just as I opened my mouth to speak, my lips parted. But no words came out. Only a breath. Heavy. Shaken. Full of everything I had held back for years. Elena's arms wrapped tighter around me. No longer the cold, distant figure from the glossy business magazines. She was real now. Human. And trembling just like me. You cannot do this, I finally whispered. This, it will cost you everything. Her eyes met mine. Wet. Determined. No, she said. It will finally give me something real. That night, I did not sleep. I sat on the floor beside Noura's bed, watching her chest rise and fall. Thinking of the sacrifices. The pain. The ridicule that would follow. Elena had power, yes. But people hated when power changed its shape. When it chose love over legacy. At dawn, I found her standing in my kitchen. Still in the same clothes. Hair tied back. No makeup. No shield. I have something to show you, she said softly. We drove in silence. Out of the city. Into the hills where the smog gave way to sky. She pulled into an open plot. Overgrown grass. Broken fence. Empty, forgotten land. Then she pointed. A new factory, she said. Built from the ground up. Owned by both of us. Fair wages. Safety. On-site childcare. I stared at her. And a school next door, she continued. For the daughters of men like you. She turned to face me. For girls like Noura. My chest tightened. I felt something inside me fracture and heal all at once. Why me? I asked. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Because the world needs to remember who builds it. We stood in silence as the sun broke through the clouds. And for the first time in years, I felt warmth where there had only been cold. The weeks that followed were not easy. Media backlash. Boardroom chaos. Investors pulled out. People protested outside her office, demanding her return, her apology, her silence. But Elena never flinched. She stood behind me at every press conference. Held my hand beneath every board table. And reminded me, again and again. This is not charity. It is justice. And slowly, the tide began to shift. Newspapers that once mocked now wrote a vision. Workers who once doubted now volunteered to train others. And Noura. Noura walked into school holding Elena's hand. Called her Miss E with pride. Told her teacher, she is building a school just for us. One afternoon, I came home to find them painting together. Blue handprints across the walls. Laughter echoing like wind chimes. I froze at the door. Overwhelmed. That sound. It had been missing for so long. Elena looked up. Her face smudged with paint. Smile wide. Come help us, she said. And in that moment, I did not see a billionaire. I saw a woman reborn. Not in boardrooms. But in the tiny hands of a little girl who trusted her without question. I walked forward. Dipped my hand in the paint. Pressed it against the wall beside theirs. 3 handprints. Side by side. We were no longer building machines. We were building a life. And just as I turned to speak, Elena's fingers brushed against mine. Not out of romance. But out of something deeper. Recognition. Gratitude. Grace. I looked into her eyes, and for once, I did not see the woman the world had written about. I saw the woman the world had forgotten to ask about. The child behind the empire. The daughter trying to rewrite her father's mistakes. The leader brave enough to start over at the bottom. That evening, she made dinner. Burnt the rice. Oversalted the lentils. Dropped a spoon on the floor 3 times. And still. It was the best meal of my life. Noura clapped after every bite. Giggled with every mess. And when Elena apologized, my daughter said something I would never forget. It does not have to be perfect. It just has to be made with love. Elena's hand trembled on her fork. And then she wept. Not like a woman ashamed. But like someone finally forgiven. After Noura went to bed, we sat on the rooftop. Stars above. The hum of the city far below. She pulled out an old, faded photograph. Her as a child. Sitting beside her father. A steel mill behind them. He told me to be strong, she said. To never cry. Never ask. Just take. Her voice cracked. But I have taken so much. And I never knew what it meant to give. I placed the photo gently on the table between us. You gave more than you know, I said. You gave us a reason to believe again. She looked at me. Tears still clinging to her lashes. And for the first time, I saw peace in her expression. Not victory. Not success. Peace. A week later, the foundation for the new factory was laid. Elena insisted on no red carpets. No press. Just workers and families. People came with their children. Carried bricks. Painted fences. Brought food. And for one day, status disappeared. Uniforms meant nothing. And hands that were once strangers now built side by side. When the sun began to set, Elena climbed a small wooden crate and called for silence. This land, she said, was never meant for towers. It was meant for people. For their dreams. For their families. She pointed to Noura. And for the children who will never have to choose between food and school again. Applause followed. But she stepped down quietly. Found me in the crowd. You started this, she said. I shook my head. No. You just remembered what mattered. She smiled. And then she reached for my hand. Not to hold it. But to lift it. So everyone could see whose hands had built their future. At that moment, I understood. The real power was never in the steel. It was in the story. And just as the crowd began to chant her name, she gently lowered my hand, stepped aside, and whispered, No, Rehan, today they chant for us. The sound was deafening. But not chaotic. It was unity. It was the voice of people who had felt invisible for too long. Finally heard. Finally seen. Children ran between legs. Covered in dust and joy. Men and women embraced. Some had never spoken to each other before that day. Now they shared stories. Laughed like old friends. Built a new world with bare, calloused hands. Elena stood barefoot in the earth. Wiping mud from her dress without care. Her hair loose, her shoulders light. She did not look like a CEO. She looked like one of us. After the ceremony, she walked with me to the far end of the site, where the boundary wall would one day stand. She stopped and looked at the horizon. I used to think legacy was about numbers. She said. About buildings. Acquisitions. Headlines. I listened. Her voice quiet but clear. But now I know. It is about moments. About people who remember your kindness. Not your power. A breeze passed. Lifting the edges of her scarf. Bringing with it the scent of something fresh. A beginning. I reached down and picked up a piece of red chalk. Wrote a single word on the raw cement slab in front of us. Home. She stared at it. Not blinking. Not speaking. And then she bent down and traced her finger over it. Letting the dust stain her skin. Do you think they will accept this? I asked. The world. The media. The shareholders. Your name next to mine. She looked at me. No fear in her eyes. Only truth. I do not need the world to approve of where I place my heart. And with that, she placed her hand over mine. Not for show. Not for cameras. But because she finally understood what it meant to build something that could not be taken away. That night, I sat beside Noura's bed again. She slept with one of Elena's scarves wrapped around her. Said it smelled like hope. I watched her dream. And in her soft breathing, I found the courage to believe that maybe we were not alone anymore. That maybe family was not about blood, but about those who show up, stay, and carry your weight. When your knees finally give out. And just as I turned out the light, A soft knock echoed through the quiet of our small home. I knew it was her. I opened the door to find Elena standing there. Her coat soaked from the evening rain, but her eyes still bright, as if lit from within. I could not sleep, she said. I kept thinking about the word you wrote today. She stepped inside slowly, her gaze settling on the walls, still painted with Noura's handprints and stories. Then she smiled. You know, she said, I used to walk through penthouses and feel nothing. But this little home. Every time I come here, I feel something alive. I poured her tea. She sat across from me at the old wooden table. The same table I had fixed a dozen times. The same one where Noura learned to draw. Where bills were counted. And dreams scribbled on napkins. She traced a crack in the wood with her finger. Do you know what I fear the most? She asked. I shook my head. Becoming like them. Like the people who thought your hands were only meant to serve. Who thought their power made them more. Her voice broke. And for a moment, she looked smaller. Not weaker. Just honest. I leaned forward. You will not become them, I said. You walked away from that world. Not to escape, but to build a better one. She looked up, tears brimming. I do not know if I can lead this new life right. I reached across the table, took her hand. You already are. And in that quiet moment, as rain tapped gently on the windows, something shifted between us. Not romance. Not desire. But something more sacred. A shared vow. To carry one another. When the world demanded too much. The next day, we broke ground on the school. Elena stood beside the children, kneeling in the dirt, helping them plant flowers around the foundation. The soil clung to her nails, and she laughed when Noura smeared clay on her cheek. Photos were taken. But this time, not for headlines. Just memories. I watched them from a distance. The woman who had once stood above the world, now kneeling to lift it. That night, we sat under the stars again. No words. Just breath. And the soft hum of something beautiful being born. But peace is never permanent. 2 days later, a letter arrived. Legal. Cold. Sharp. Her former board members had filed a motion, accusing her of breaching fiduciary duty, alleging she was misappropriating company resources to benefit non-strategic personnel. I read the words again and again, then looked at her. She did not cry. She did not tremble. She simply said, "Let them come. I will not go back." And just as I opened my mouth to answer, I was not supposed to be there that day. I had no money, no plan, no idea what the next hour held. My name is Omar. And at that point, I was just trying to survive one more night on the street. I had been homeless for 6 months. A factory layoff, a medical bill, and my brother's sudden death. That was all it took to drag me from a quiet life to sleeping behind dumpsters. I used to be someone. A mechanic. A man with steady hands and a quiet pride. But pride fades fast when your stomach stays empty. That afternoon, I stood outside the Grandview Mall, watching the people pass. Clean shoes. Full shopping bags. Laughter spilling from lives I could barely remember. I was just about to walk away when I heard it. A scream. Small. Frightened. Then a crash. A toddler had wandered into the street. A tiny girl in a pink jacket. A delivery van was speeding around the corner. No one moved. No one, except me. My legs just ran. Instinct. I threw myself forward, arms out. Snatched her up and rolled to the curb just as the van screeched past us, inches away. People screamed. Someone called security. I clutched the girl to my chest, her tiny heart pounding against mine. She was sobbing. I whispered, "You are safe now. You are safe." Then I looked up, and met the eyes of a man sprinting toward us. Tailored suit. Panic written all over his face. He fell to his knees, scooped her from my arms, and hugged her like he was drowning. That was the first time I met Malik Raza. Billionaire. Hotel magnate. And father to the little girl I had just saved. He asked no questions. Just held her. Then looked at me. And saw the dirt, the smell, the exhaustion. He did not flinch. He stood up, extended his hand. "Thank you," he said. His voice shook. "You saved my daughter." I nodded. I just did what anyone would do. But that was a lie. No one else moved. Only me. Security arrived, ready to drag me away. But Malik stopped them. "He is my guest now," he said. He brought me to his hotel. His own suite. Told his assistant to get me clean clothes, a hot meal, and a place to sleep. I tried to protest. But he raised his hand gently. "I owe you everything," he said. The next morning, I woke in the softest bed I had ever touched. And found a letter on the nightstand. "You saved what matters most. Let me do the same for you." Signed, Malik. He offered me a job. Maintenance at one of his properties. He said I would not need experience. Just honesty. And a willingness to work. I cried in the hallway, hiding from the cameras. I had gone from dirt to dignity, overnight. But that was only the beginning. Over the next few months, I worked hard. First fixing leaks. Then boilers. Then entire floors. Malik visited often. Sometimes with his daughter. She would run to me, calling me Uncle Omar. Her arms open wide. And slowly, people began to see me not as the man from the street, but the man who saved the heir to an empire. But not everyone was happy. Some questioned Malik's decision. Said I was a publicity risk. A poor man, too close to power. One afternoon, I overheard a board member say, "You are grooming a beggar to sit at the table." But Malik replied, "Better a beggar with a heart, than a king without a soul." And that night, he invited me to dinner. At his family table. There, I met her. His sister. Aliyah. Sharp. Strong. With eyes that had clearly seen pain. But refused to surrender to it. She watched me all evening. And when we were alone in the hallway, she said, "My brother is rarely wrong about people. But you might be the best proof of it." I smiled. "I am just a man who ran toward a child." "No," she said. "You are the man who reminded us what humanity looks like." We began to talk more. Then share tea on evenings. Then walks. Then, well, something I never dared to hope for. But nothing this beautiful comes without its trials. Rumors started. Accusations. Whispers in the press. Poor man chasing the billionaire's sister. Savior or schemer? It broke something in me. Made me question everything. Who was I to be here? In these halls, these meetings, these moments? And just as I was ready to walk away, Aliyah came to my door. She sat beside me on the floor, took my hand, and whispered, "You saved us. Let us save you back." And just as I opened my mouth to speak, I stared at her, at the calm behind her defiance, at the woman who once feared boardrooms, now ready to face their wrath with her head held high. "You will lose everything," I said quietly. She looked at me. No denial. No delusion. "I already did, Rayhan," she whispered. "When I lived for them. I lost myself. Now I finally know who I am. Let them take the rest." I wanted to argue. To shield her. To tell her we could find another way. But some battles are not meant to be avoided. They are meant to be fought. So others will never have to fight them again. That night, I stayed awake. Elena sleeping on the worn-out couch. One arm draped across Noura's stuffed bear. Even in her rest, she held on to something soft. Something human. In the morning, the news hit. Headlines with her name smeared in bold letters. Former steel heiress under fire for alleged corporate misconduct. Whispers of romance and revolt. Who is Rayhan Malik? I was no longer invisible. But not in the way I ever wanted. Neighbors looked twice. Old co-workers avoided my eyes. Some even questioned my integrity. But none of that mattered when I saw Elena walk into the courtroom. Alone. No lawyer beside her. Just conviction. I sat behind her. Rows of suits and silent stares trying to intimidate her. She stood before the judge. Voice steady. "I am not guilty of misusing funds," she said. "I used my own dividends. My own wealth. To give back what we took for decades." Whispers filled the room. But she kept going. And if that makes me unfit to lead, then perhaps the definition of leadership is broken. The judge said little. Adjourned the session. More hearings to come. Outside, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted. Elena took my hand. "I do not care if they strip my name from every building," she said. "As long as they do not take away the future we are building." In the weeks that followed, donations poured in. From workers. From communities. From people who had never met her, but saw themselves in our story. The school opened on time. Paint chipped in places. Chairs a little uneven. But the laughter inside made it holy. Elena taught art once a week. Nura insisted on calling her Miss E in class. But at home, she called her something else. Family. One evening, while we were painting the classroom windows, Elena turned to me. Do you think we will survive this storm? I looked at her. At the woman who had traded a castle for a crumbling house filled with light. We already have, I said. She smiled. And then, she whispered something that caught in my throat. I love who I have become because I met you. And just as I stepped closer to answer, my heart beat so loudly I could hear it echo in the silence between us. She stood there, not as the woman from the papers. Not as the billionaire. But as someone raw. Unarmored. True. I searched her eyes. Not for confirmation. But for clarity. To make sure this was not another passing moment in a world so easily stolen by noise. I never thought I could be loved by someone like you, I finally said. Someone from a world I only ever saw through a fence. Her hand found mine. Warm. Grounded. Maybe that is the problem, she said gently. Your world and mine were never supposed to be separate. It was only built that way. But brick by brick, we are tearing it down. I nodded. Because what else could I do? In the face of a truth so tender? That night, we finished painting. Then sat on the rooftop with Nura curled between us. Her head resting on Elena's lap. Her thumb lazily tracing stars in the sky with an imaginary pen. She dreams in constellations, Elena whispered. She believes we are writing our story in the sky. I smiled. Because once upon a time, I thought our story would be buried under concrete. The next morning, we received the final letter. The board had voted. Elena was officially removed from all executive positions. Her shares frozen. Her name erased from the companies her father once ruled. I read the letter aloud. When I finished, she looked at me with steady eyes. Let them take the name, she said. They can keep the legacy. We have the future. There was pain behind her calm. But also pride. Pride in knowing she walked away. Not because she lost. But because she chose something greater. We moved forward. One stone. One lesson. One child at a time. And slowly, the world began to change. Not loudly. But with kindness. And courage. And stories. One afternoon, I stood in the school courtyard. Children running past me. Laughter like music in the air. Elena called out from the doorway. We have visitors. I turned. 2 men in suits. A woman holding a tablet. Their faces serious, unreadable. They were not reporters. Not lawyers. Something else. Elena walked beside me. Calm. Poised. The man stepped forward. Extended his hand. We represent a group of founders. We have been following your work. Quietly. Respectfully. And we believe this. What you are building is the model the world needs next. He paused. Would you consider leading a new initiative? One where people matter more than profits? I looked at Elena. Then at the children. And just as I turned back to answer, I looked at Elena. She gave me the smallest nod. But it held the weight of everything we had built together. Brick by brick. Scar by scar. Hope by trembling hope. I turned back to the man. Took a breath. And said, we are not interested in building another empire. We are interested in building something that lasts. Something that heals. If your vision aligns with that, then we are ready. He smiled. Not the polished smile of a businessman, but the honest smile of a man who had found a door he thought would never open. That day marked a new beginning. Not with headlines or boardrooms, but with classrooms, gardens, community kitchens, and places where no one had to prove their worth. To be treated with dignity. Elena and I did not return to power. We rose beyond it. Our home remained small, but its heart stretched across thousands of lives. And every evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, we sat with Nura in our arms, listening to the laughter from the school across the street. And I knew. We had written a different kind of story. Not one of wealth. Not one of fame. But of redemption. Of love found in the ashes. Of kindness that refused to break. Of a man once buried under steel. And a woman once trapped in glass. Who learned to rebuild the world. One soul at a time. Moral of the story. True success is not found in the titles you earn, but in the lives you uplift. Real power is not in rising above others, but in choosing to rise with them. And love. Love is not a destination you stumble upon. It is a decision. A sacrifice. A promise to see the humanity in each other, even when the world looks away. This is not the story of a billionaire. This is the story of a human being, who remembered where she came from, and of another, who reminded her why it mattered. Together, they did not change the world. They changed hearts. And sometimes, that is more than enough. Thank you for listening to this heartfelt story on Brave Souls Speak. If it moved you, share it, comment below, and let someone know. You are never alone. Together, we are building a community of strength, healing, and truth. One brave soul at a time.